So, sure, I've got some liquid here. We're gonna do a reading from today's brand new release, The ELIXIR of Denial. Um, and here we go. Part 1. If I Could Turn Back Time. Fall 2007. Chapter 1. Ashley had spent a year trying to fuck the memory of Robin Gates out of her system, but it hadn't worked. Not at all. Because here she was again, with another stranger's head between her thighs, the 20th at least, and still she felt haunted. Because once the face was gone from view, once it was only the hair atop the stranger's head that Ashley could see, the stranger might as well have been Robin anyway. Robin had dyed her hair so many times, had cut it in so many different ways, that Ashley's imagination had no trouble in running wild. Afterward, smoking a cigarette on the balcony while the stranger dressed and collected their tip, Ashley tried again to count the number of bridges that spanned the rushing waters of the Willamette. A search on her phone could have told her, but she'd always been fond of doing things the hard way. The honest way. And besides, she'd left the phone back on the nightstand. "Aren't you worried it'll be stolen?" That's what Robin would have said in a moment like this, what Ashley could hear the ghost of Robin saying right now. "Do you worry that I'll steal your stuff when you fall asleep next to me?" That's what Ashley would have said in return. Robin would have frowned at that. Then she would have said this was different. Ashley was her girlfriend, first of all, and second of all, Ashley was a stripper and not a prostitute. On the balcony, Ashley sighed. She'd loved Robin, but the girl was not without her faults, nor, it seemed, was her ghost. There was a knock at the balcony's door. Ashley glanced over her shoulder to see what the stranger wanted. The tip had been sizable, and the goodbye clear. Or so Ashley had thought. "You're not afraid someone will see you?" asked the stranger. "Smoking?" said Ashley with a coy grin. "Naked," said the stranger, clarifying. Ashley smiled as she took another drag. "Let them see," she said. "Let them see." The next day, before her red-eye home to Boston, Ashley took a walk through Old Town toward the Steel Bridge. Leaving the last of her cash in a series of outstretched hands along the way, and her suitcase of clothes at a nearby shelter, she made it to the middle of the sturdy old structure with naught but a bag of ashes to her name. And a phone and a passport, she remembered. With a frown, she chided herself for being melodramatic. As cars rumbled across the deck of the bridge above her, as cyclists whipped by behind her on the lower deck's walkway, even as a whistle in the distance signaled the imminent arrival of some lumbering train or another, Ashley stood still and silent. But thoughts raced across her mind as fast as the traffic speeding by all around her, and after a few minutes of trying and failing to slow them down, Ashley gave up. She grunted, frustrated with herself, frustrated by her inability to honor her lover's memory with even a moment of silence. And she unzipped the plastic bag. Then she reached in for a pinch of Robin's remains, so that she could get this over with. A pinch for every place I ever played. That had been Robin's request. And she'd played Portland twice, once at the Aladdin and once at the Roseland. So here Ashley was, to do the bidding of the deceased once again. It occurred to Ashley then, as she reached into the bag for a second pinch, that maybe the reason she couldn't free herself from Robin's ghost was that she carried these pieces of Robin with her everywhere she went. And maybe if she just emptied out everything here, it would be all over. And how would Robin even know? She was dead, after all. Ashley listened for the voice of Robin's ghost on the breeze, waited for the wind to whisper, "I would know," into her ear. But the wind said nothing. Robin, if she were out there somewhere, in some way, she said nothing. Maybe she wanted Ashley to let her go. So Ashley unzipped the bag all the way this time and tipped the open maw toward the river below. She watched the last remains of her lost love slip ever closer to the precipice, reminding her of the sand in an hourglass. It would all be gone eventually, wouldn't it? All of it gone to the other side, so why not be done with it now? But Ashley couldn't do it. She sealed the bag right back up and returned it to the safety of her sweatshirt's front pouch. If Ashley had done it, Robin might not have known. She was dead, true. But Ashley would have known. She would have had to live with knowing. And she was sick of what she knew. Back home in Boston, on the way from the airport to her family's home on Cape Cod, Ashley asked her cousin Matt if she could smoke in his car. "Smoke?" asked Matt, confused. "Smoke?" said Ashley, shaking the cigarette at him in case he'd suddenly lost the ability to comprehend English. "That's what you bought with the money you bummed off me?" he asked, grimacing as he spoke. "Yeah," she said. Then she pointed at the soda she'd slipped into his cup holder. "And the Coke." Matt returned his focus to the road. Ashley, taking Matt's silence to be a no, slipped the cigarette back into the pack. Then she rolled down the window and tossed the pack right out the side. The lighter, too. Still, Matt said nothing. As Ashley cranked the handle to close the window again, she asked Matt if he knew there were buttons for this shit now. "Never trusted those things," he said. "Besides, I like to do things the hard way." He glanced at Ashley to see if she remembered their grandfather's old saying, too. "The honest way," she said, finishing the sentence. So that was it, she realized. Matt was still thinking about Grampy. Dead over 10 years now and still haunting him. Haunting Matt the way Robin was haunting Ashley. And why not? Matt had been there at Grampy's end, just as Ashley had been there at Robin's. Matt had been the only one there, actually. The only member of the family at Gramp's side in those last years. The years he spent hacking his lungs apart with cough after cacophonous cough. The family had fractured over the matter of Matt's disastering coming out, of course, and Grampy had taken the poor boy in. And so, Matt had been the one to buy Gramp his cigarettes when the old man was too weak to drive to the center of town to get them himself. Matt had been the one to drive Grampy to the hospital, to see the doctors he would hear but not heed. Matt had been the one to find his grandfather turning blue that April morning, slumped over the white porcelain of the toilet into which he'd coughed up a pool of his red, red blood, a tableau as all-American as it was tragic. Yep, that was Matt, and he wasn't going to be party to that kind of departure again. "You have to special order these?" asked Ashley, pointing at the window crank and trying to change the subject. Matt nodded. "What you gonna do when they don't even offer them on special orders anymore?" Matt shrugged. Ashley closed her eyes and sighed a heavy sigh. There was no getting away from this. He wanted answers. As much as he might hate them, he wanted them. "I started years ago," she told him, "for work." Though he kept his eyes on the road, he raised his right eyebrow, a signal for her to explain, to go on. "I'd noticed a direct correlation between girls who smoked and girls who didn't," she said, "and though there was less of an impact on tips at the rail—" "The rail?" he said. "The rail along the stage," Ashley explained. "Anyway, the difference in tips collected on stage by smokers versus non-smokers was statistically insignificant." "But," said Matt, his voice pitching upward at the end of the word. "But the difference between smokers and non-smokers when it came to private dances was impossible to ignore," said Ashley. "Not only did the smokers get dances more often, they were also more likely to get a second song out of a guy, and they pocketed significantly higher tips to boot." "Do strippers have pockets?" asked Matt. Ashley slugged him in the arm for the joke, but she felt comforted that the amateur comedian inside her cousin was making an appearance at last. That meant that she still had at least a slight chance at forgiveness. "It's a phallic thing, then?" asked Matt. "The cigarettes?" Ashley nodded. "Customers just loved seeing something between a lady's lips, and if it couldn't be them, better that it be something so small that it couldn't be seen as competition." "You never tried a cigar?" asked Matt. Ashley nodded. "Oh, I did," she said, "but there were only a few guys that seemed to work on, and they were generous, sure, but they were very few and far between. I went back to the cigs and made up the difference in volume in no time flat." Matt shook his head at her, a smirk playing at his lips. "You are too smart to be taking off your clothes for a living," he said. Ashley punched him again. I know, said Matt, rubbing at his arm. "Female empowerment and all that, reclaiming female desire and whatnot. Which wave of feminism are we on now?" Ashley knew he was joking, but she told him she was going to hit him again anyway if he didn't cut the shit. "What I want to know," said Matt, as he flicked on his blinker to signal his turn off one highway and onto the next, "is how you hid it from us all these years." "Nicorette when I'm around the family," she began. "That's what you're always chewing?" he said, interrupting. "I thought it was Doublemint, maybe Hubba Bubba." "Altoids, hand lotion, and perfume," she continued, "same as I used at the club to keep the non-smokers from getting turned off by the reek of me." "What about your teeth?" said Matt, glancing over at her quickly before returning his gaze to the road. Gramps' teeth were as yellow as all get out near the end. "I brush like a motherfucker," she said, "and I've made whitening strips my best friend." They drove on in silence for a while, all of Matt's questions seemingly answered. But then, as they crossed over the Cape Cod Canal by way of the Sagamore Bridge, Matt piped up again. "Aren't you scared?" he asked. "Knowing how Gramp died, aren't you the least bit—" "I see an oncologist once a month," she blurted out. "Isn't that a lot?" asked Matt. Ashley laughed. "Sure," she said, "but the doctor's hot." "Oh, thank you, Shy. Sorry that you can't stay." I'll answer some of the questions here. I'm going to just finish up this chapter. Thank you so much for stopping by. We just got a little bit left in this chapter, and then I'm going to wrap up. There. The sun was rising over Nantucket Sound as they pulled into the driveway, painting the sky above Red River Beach in shades of bronze and gold. Out on the lawn, Ashley's brother Michael was painting too, albeit on a slightly smaller canvas. And he was doing it wearing nothing but a pair of plaid boxer shorts and a sleeve of dried paint on each of his arms. "What's he working on?" Ashley asked Matt. Matt put the car in park and nodded toward the family's old barn, the walkout basement of which had been converted into a small theater in recent years. As they got out of the car, Ashley asked if the painting was for the website or a poster or something. "Or something," said Matt, smirking and shaking his head. "Veronica and Desiree keep telling him he's taking too much time on it, that it was perfect the first 3 times. But he's been out here every morning this week. Showed up at Tracy's birthday party on Sunday with paint in his beard. And here he is, on his own birthday, sweating details no one will ever see, not when the damn thing is shrunk down to fit in the nav bar of a website nobody's going to visit, or in the corner of a poster that's just going to get covered up with 100 other flyers down at the coffee shop." "Business isn't as booming as Vern and Des hoped it would be?" asked Ashley. "Well," said Matt, "when you're hoping a certain rock star will put you on the map by playing the closing show of her tour at your new venue, and then that closing show never happens." He trailed off. "Sorry," he said. I didn't mean to imply that Robin, I know she didn't get shot on purpose." Ashley gave him a gentle squeeze in the same place she'd punched him before, hoping he'd get the message that it was okay, since she didn't have the strength to say that out loud to someone yet again. A lot of shit had gone south since Robin had been killed, more than Robin would ever know. Unless she does know, Ashley thought to herself. Then she paused, listening again for the wind, for one particular voice floating upon it. But the air was still, maddeningly still. I've been working on some plays about the family's history, said Matt with a sigh. Seeing as everyone loves a story about a fall from grace, he said, and our family's full of those. They crept gingerly toward the front porch, careful not to disrupt the master at work on the front lawn, lest he soil his shorts in fright. And as they did, Ashley asked Matt what parts of the family's history he was working on. Well, I've got the coming out movie y'all are going to watch tonight, he began, nodding at Michael as he said, at the birthday boy's special request. Then, he said, I've got this series about our great-grandfather's 7 wives. You remember them, right? Ashley did remember them. One in particular. You doing one on the witch? Ashley asked. You doing one on Ada? Matt nodded. I hope so. Tough as nut to crack, though. How to tell that story without sounding plausible, given the things that woman believed and put down in her journal, given the yarns Grampy used to spin about her and her untimely demise. Ashley didn't know why she hadn't told Matt, or anyone else for that matter, that Grampy's crazy stories about Ada barely scratched the surface, but she hadn't. Maybe she thought they wouldn't believe her. Maybe she thought they'd chalk it all up to post-traumatic stress over being there when Robin was shot. But Ashley had seen Ada across the street the night of the murder, had seen with her own 2 eyes a woman who was supposed to have been killed 114 years beforehand. And before all that, Ashley had listened to Robin's stories about her encounters with Ada, about the obituary Robin had found when she was a kid and how it spelled out her destiny. Ashley had seen and heard all manner of unbelievable things about Ada at this point, and she wasn't ready to be told she was crazy, because she wasn't crazy. Unless she was. A chuckle from Matt brought her back to reality, and she asked him what was so funny. Have I ever told you, Matt began, about the time we tried one of old Ada's potions out on Veronica? No, said Ashley, trying to keep her jaw from falling to the floor. I don't think you have.